Welcome to Video 8. Video 8 is titled, Why I Am Not an Egalitarian. Either, if stepping away from hierarchical complementarianism sounds unsettling to some, then rejecting egalitarianism may sound even more surprising to others. Because egalitarianism often presents itself as the obvious moral alternative. It names real problems. It resists domination. It wants justice and safety. Those instincts matter. But as I read Paul, I came to realize that egalitarianism is also answering a question Paul is not asking. Here's why. Egalitarianism begins by identifying power itself as the central problem in relationships. Wherever one person stands over another, injustice is assumed to be near at hand. Difference is treated as dangerous. Asymmetry is treated with suspicion. From there, a decisive assumption is made. If power produces domination, then power itself must be neutralized. If difference creates hierarchy, then difference must be flattened. The theological task becomes, how can Christian life escape power altogether? Once this assumption is made, sameness becomes protective. Flattening becomes a safeguard. Equality becomes the primary moral category. Order is now preserved by eliminating asymmetry. This is why it is fair to say, egalitarianism often assumes that because power leads to domination, power itself must be overcome or neutralized in order to preserve justice. But the logic does not stop there, because egalitarianism also treats asymmetry itself as dangerous. It effectively treats pre-fall difference as a problem that must be corrected. In other words, difference becomes suspect both after the fall and before the fall. That, too, is a very strong claim, and it is precisely where the difficulty arises, because that is not how Paul reasons. Paul does not assume that relational difference produces domination. In Genesis 2, difference exists without rivalry. Asymmetry exists without threat. Order exists without power. That is Paul's starting point, not Genesis 3. Egalitarianism often responds by saying, yes, but power corrupts. Paul agrees that power corrupts. But Paul does not agree that difference must therefore be erased. Paul does not flatten relationships to achieve peace. He reorders them around Christ. This is why Paul does not give identical commands in Ephesians 5. He does not tell husbands and wives to do the same thing. He gives different actions that correspond to a single relational picture. Christ loves. The church responds. That asymmetry is not hierarchy, but it is also not sameness. Egalitarianism worries that asymmetry always conceals domination. Paul believes asymmetry can display love. Egalitarianism often says, if power is the problem, remove it. Paul says, if domination is the problem, restore gift. That is a very different solution. Paul does not erase difference to secure justice. He restores difference within redeemed relational order. This is why egalitarian readings of Paul often feel strained. They have to flatten language. They have to neutralize imagery. They have to treat creation references as culturally disposable. Paul does none of that. He returns again and again to origin, body, and gift, not because he is conservative, but because he is theological. So when I say I am not an egalitarian, I do not mean that I am indifferent to justice or blind to abuse. Rather, I mean that I do not believe flattening difference restores creation. It avoids domination by evacuating order, and Paul does not take that path. He believes Christ makes a different path possible, one where difference does not threaten, order does not dominate, and love does not require control. In the next video, I want to step back from both labels altogether and ask a more fundamental question. Why does Paul consistently refuse the categories we keep trying to force onto him? And what happens if we let him speak on his own terms?